Hi, I'm Misty, and I'm going to show you exactly how to sew this fox from start to finish. I'm going to share the design choices I made along the way so that you can take those techniques and apply them to your own plushies that you want to create. So come along with me. We're going to sew this little guy and learn together. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why each technique works. And you can take these principles and design your own plushies. Before we jump in, let's quickly go over what you'll need. You'll want your fox pattern pieces. Grab those from my free school community. And some fleece or minky fabric, whatever fabric that you want to sew this little guy out of. You're going to need some coordinating thread, basic sewing supplies like scissors and pins, and some stuffing. I'll also be using felt for the eyes, but you can embroider those if you prefer. Everything's pretty standard, nothing fancy required. Now let's get your pieces cut out, but first I need to save you from the mistake that ruins more plushies than any other cutting error. The pattern will tell you exactly how many pieces you need and what color to use, so follow those directions carefully. But here's the most important thing to remember. You need to cut one pattern piece and then flip it over and cut another. One pattern piece needs to be mirrored so you get a left and a right side. This is super important because if you cut both pieces the same way, you'll end up with two left sides or two right sides. And trust me, that doesn't work. Ask me how I know. Cut one, flip the pattern, cut another. So the first thing that we're going to do is cut out the eye placement. I personally love this trick because it makes it so that we can get accurate eye placement every time. I'm just going to use felt for this little guy. You could use safety eyes. You could embroider some eyes on. So what we're going to do is you're going to cut out this little circle for the eye placement. Once we cut this piece out, we can just lay our eyepiece right on top. If we've got our paper all lined up like this, then our little felt, we can just put the eye down and pull this little paper off. And then we've got the perfect placement. Don't poke yourself, it hurts. Okay, then we're gonna do the same thing on this side. Now we're clipping our threads. Okay, we've got our little eyes attached. Simple little eyes. This is a great way to do eyes. Okay, we're gonna set him aside. First thing we need to do is sew our ears together. We've got our two ears. We're gonna put right sides together. We're gonna sew up on the pattern. This one is A and B, so we're gonna sew from A up to B, and we're gonna leave this open. Next thing we're gonna do is sew our arms together. We've got two of them. Line them up. Okay, on the pattern, we're talking about, we're gonna leave an opening right here. So what we wanna do is make a little clip with our fabric so we know when to stop, when to keep going. Okay. Okay, one thing we need to remember is I'm not using pins in this because this is cotton fabric and it stays really well together, especially when we're sewing two pieces of fabric that we're just sandwiching together and putting together. It's fine. I don't need pins for this, but I would recommend pins if you're sewing with minky, with fur. You've got to put pins in that. Okay, next one. We've got some ears, we've got some arms onto our belly. Okay, one thing that I want to do is mark on here with our fabric marker where we're going to stop our dart, okay? Mark that. We've also got some markings up here that will be important later. Let's add a little notches for those so that we can do that more easily later, but this is the neck mark. We're going to do that for lining up our neck, and then this is where we line up our arms. It's only marked on once, but you got to do it on both sides. Okay, so O lines up with your O on your hand or arm, and so when you line them up, they go like this. Anyway, okay. Where's our dot? Okay, let's sew to our dot. There we go, look at that. And when you're doing darts, it looks much cleaner if you sew right off to the edge. This is what else we need to do. So this is our head back. We've got 2 of them. We've got all sorts of little markings on this one. If you mark your pattern now with all of the little notches, these little indents right here, it's going to help you later know where to place things. Okay, so let's mark those and then we'll do better with our lining up of everything. So mark those. This one's right here for K, but I'd actually recommend let's only go up to here. I learned a little trick after making this pattern that I'm gonna teach you guys instead of that one. Okay. So for K, we're gonna mark up here instead of where the pattern says down here. It'll make it easier. Okay, right sides together. Got that one done. Next step, side tails, DD to EE. Okay, I want to show you something because this is a really good example of something that happens in plush making a lot that we've got to watch for. If we were to have just lined up this point to this tip, it would have turned out wonky. Because we're lining up sewing line to sewing line, but to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, this DD mark right here goes clear up to this point. Okay, but when we line it up, okay, here we go. So if we cut that line off, look, we can see that sewing lines line up perfectly. So it's really something you have to watch for when you're sewing other people's patterns, including making your own patterns. If I were to have lined up my seam allowance lines, my pattern would have ended up looking like this. And then we would have gotten frustrated when we opened it up and it didn't look nice. So make sure you're sewing on the sewing lines and not just lining up your seam allowance lines. You have to be aware of that, okay? And if that's something that you're gonna do is make your own patterns, that's something to be aware of is that probably the people sewing your patterns don't know that. So having, like on this pattern right here, the little dots and telling them to mark those dots and to line them up, they're going to be more successful with your patterns. And then they're going to have a better experience with your patterns, which is so important. Okay, let's sew the tail together. Last tail, we have this little guy. This is a gusset. We're really going to want to mark these dots, especially this one over here. Marking dots is important when you have places that you need to mark. Whoops, just tore through that. Okay. Here's this one, 2 more dots. So let's mark those dots. See them? 2 dots. Okay. Poke a hole. I really need to get an awl. You know what? I had an awl. A lady borrowed it and never gave it back. So I guess I better go buy another one. Okay, mark. Here we go. We're going to put these 2 together. Remember, lining up sewing lines too, not just seam allowance lines. See that again? Seam allowance lines are different than our sewing lines. That's what happens when you're sewing with curves all the time, which happens with plushies. All right, let's sew our nose. Let's not forget him. We're just gonna go around him. Keep our seams clean. Okay, the next important thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of our little pieces. And this is one thing that we have to learn when making plushies is the importance of clipping our seams. Okay, our seam allowance, when we have all of these little tiny curves, if you don't clip them, then you're going to find that when you turn them around, they're not going to turn and look nice. They're going to get, the inside seam allowance is going to tug on them so that they can't turn at their complete ability, I guess is a good way of saying it. But you just gotta clip. Clip the edges, especially the deep curves. See that? You gotta clip. Okay. So learn this early, clip your seams. You just always got to be clipping seams. Some people clip them off. I don't think that's necessary. You definitely need to at least ease the tension that's caused by flipping these over. And that's really why we cut them, is because we're easing tension so that they can flip and they can actually sit on the curve like they're supposed to. This is the arm. This is an important curve to clip, especially this one. If we don't clip that one, it's gonna look bad. So and clip the belly. Okay, that was easy. Okay, so it's a new day. I'm just getting back to sewing. That's the life of a mother, right? That I have things to do. I don't always get to be down here sewing. So I'm in new clothes. I'm ready to go. We're going to finish this fox today. We can do it. Okay, we're putting the face together, and we want to be able to have 2 colors on one piece of the pattern. So this is called color blocking, and this technically could be one pattern piece if we had wanted or cared that this was one fabric color. But because we want to separate his face and have a color on top and a color on bottom, I designed the pattern so that we could color it separately. The fun thing about color blocking is that you don't, it doesn't necessarily change the pattern, but it allows us to add multiple colors onto the same piece. So it does make it so that we have to sew opposing curves, which is okay. I'm going to show you how to do that. And then we'll move on to putting the head together. So here are our 2 pieces that we want to put together that we're color blocking. On the pattern, I can show you where I've already marked right here. I've cut little notches into the fabric so we know where to line up our fabric. Something that's interesting about doing pattern pieces like this is that when they look like they're the same line, but when you are pinning them together, you're actually pinning together opposing curves. So it's important to have little markings in some way to show that that's what we're doing. So we're just going to put our 2 pieces together like this, line up our little notches, and start pinning. Pin your little notches first, and then we're gonna have to ease these in. This one is not actually that bad. And one of the good examples of why I choose to show you guys how to sew patterns in cotton, because of the ease of being able to see it. One of these days we'll do a Minky view as well to talk about that. But as far as like video ability for you guys to see what we're working on, cotton really is the best example for that. So you just gotta kind of ease that fabric in there. And our last one. Remember that we have to do the dot, and we're not gonna line up this end point may not line up, and that's okay. We just remember what we're lining up is the sewing line, not the seam allowance. So there's that right there. Okay. So the point is to try to get these lines as straight as possible, your seam allowance line, and ultimately your sewing line, which is causing rounding right here and bunching, but that's okay. Our pins are keeping the bunching away from our sew line, and that's kind of why you need a lot of pins when sewing stuffies, because the goal is to keep the sewing line as straight as possible. And it's not something you really can fix while you're under your sewing machine working, so you got to rely on those pins to get it to be accurate. Okay, so see this? I've got it all pinned. We've got our seam allowance lined up, our lines marked, and now we're gonna sew it. First I've got to pin this one, and then we'll sew both of them at the same time. Then we open it up, we're gonna check, make sure everything's okay. Look at, beautiful. Okay, so here we have it. This piece, see how it technically is one piece, but we color blocked it. Now we're going to clip our seams. Okay, two little fox faces. Here we go. We're gonna face right sides together. We're gonna sew from the top down up his nose and down to his neck. And what you're gonna wanna do is when you're pinning him, you're gonna wanna line up this seam right here so that your nose lines up and your two colors line up between piece to piece. Open your seams, make sure you're lining up your seam line. Now, okay, do you see this? Now I've got this pinned all the way down. I have this seam open on both sides. I made sure to open up right here where my seam line is, where I'm going to actually be stitching, because then the fabric lines match up in there, not up here, so they're not misaligned on the actual sewing line. So we're going to start here, come up around, pivot, and then come here down to here. Okay, let's check, make sure we're happy with the nose. Oh, do you know what? Look, it's not coming out. That's because I didn't clip this. Let's clip. We've got to clip our seams. Always clip your seams. A perfect little nose. We've got our first little face put together and a perfectly stitched nose. And it looks great. So now we're gonna finish the head by adding the ears and then putting it all together. The next thing we're gonna do, we've got to flip our ear. Now, something that we need to talk about in a later video, more in depth, is the angle of your curves, which really makes a big difference in making your plushies, because depending on the curve, will turn out differently. So the reason I bring that up now is because I want to show you guys something that I did for this ear that isn't always necessary, but I put this curve right here in attempt, because I was kind of frustrated with how the ear was not standing up, but I still wanted just a nice thin little ear to go with that style. So the curve here, I don't know if you can see it on the plushie, but he's really old, so he's not standing up as good as he used to, but it creates some tension, and that tension allows the ear to stand up. So is that the best way to do it? I don't know, probably not. It's not perfect, but it worked for the style that I wanted at that time. So that's where that curve is coming in, but it's a good example of how you can use different methods and including tension to create the style that you want. So that's what this curve is doing right here, is when we add it to the plush, it's gonna make his ears have a little more dimension than it would have otherwise. So there's other ways to do it and we can talk about it, but in this pattern, this is the way that I chose to do that. Now that I've got the ears all pinned on here, we're gonna line these up together, the face front and the face back, and we're gonna pin the most important parts first. We're gonna do this top seam, because seams always look better when they are lined up, and open up your seams for those pins so that we don't get any weird tugging, and then pin those ones first. So we are lining up the most important parts first. So I've got this lined up first, then we're gonna go all the way around. We've got them pinned together. This is his nose. This is the back of him. We're gonna go up and around, all the way around, and we're leaving this section, which is his neck, open. We got our face sewn together. We did it, woohoo! Okay, here we go. Now, remember, you can clip off your corners, but then we also need to clip our seams, but don't clip your stitch lines that you just made. Okay, the moment of truth. Here we go. We're gonna turn him around. Oh, look at this cute little fox. We did it. Okay. Poke your corners out. All right, here we go. Let's get the body put together. Okay, so we've got our 3 tail pieces. 1, 2, 3. And this is the only gusset that we have in this pattern, but gussets can be a video all on its own, and we'll talk about those later. So make sure you subscribe so you know when we talk about them. But gussets are for adding width to a pattern. When I was making this tail, I really wanted to have a big, fluffy, fat tail. That's really hard to do when you only have 2 pieces that you're sandwiching together. I could have added darts, but still the easiest way is to design and pattern together a gusset. It just adds a cute little dimension that is fun. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is sew the gusset into the tail. And if we have on our pattern piece, we have the markings on here that we should have marked earlier. The little dots indicate where things line up. So here on the pattern, we had these little FF markings with the little dot. When I did it, I tore it, but I marked it on my pattern. But oh, here it is right here. So that's gonna help me know where I need to line it up on here. Okay, this little part of the pattern is where we're actually going to tuck the tail into the fox. The FF marking on the actual tail is right here. We're gonna pin this and line this dot up with this dot. That's really hard to see, I'm sorry. Okay, the next thing we're gonna line up is these 2 seams over here, because we want those fabric seam to line up, because that'll be way cuter and look way more professional if our seams all line up. Okay, let's cut this. We're gonna ease this so that it lines up better. Stretch that fabric out so that we can actually line up. Remember, we're lining up the seam line, not the seam allowance. Okay, now something that's special about this pattern that you can see on the actual paper is that these 2 little dots that I've marked on here, they actually are where we line up on the tail tip. So this fabric piece actually goes up and past. So it's another example of why it's important to stop at the sew line and not to continue. And when we marked it on here so we know where to stop. But that's because once we add the second piece, this, you'll see, I'll show you, the little tip goes up, so it's cute. Okay, here's our tail and our gusset pinned together. We're gonna sew from the dot on this side, which is FF, up and around until this little dot that was over here. Don't go to the end of the fabric. Okay, so we added this line to add our little gusset in. Look, I didn't line it up perfectly. It's pretty close, but I would have liked to have lined up better. I'm gonna do better on the next one. Okay, so, but see, this one is also, we went up to the dots and we didn't go to the end of the fabric. See that? Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing on the other side, but this time we're gonna make sure that we start where we stopped stitching right here, okay? Because then that means that we're not stitching any little stitches into the other tail piece, which is then annoying because we don't wanna snag that and then it'll look funny. Okay, add this line. We're gonna do better about lining it up this time. Okay, there we go, maybe. Look, we did much better this time. See, here's the outside of the tail. We just sewed. We did much better this time. That's a little off right there, but that's okay. Maybe I should take up Bob Ross's Happy Little Accidents Life goes too fast to worry about tiny little mistakes. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do, we have our 3 pieces like this. We've made our tail wider with our little gusset. So we just need to sew this actually together. And remember on the pattern, it was marked where we're gonna leave a little bit of an opening for stuffing this little guy. So we can line up our seams. So from here, open this up, and then this gusset is actually pinched. Do you see that? So we're going to sew up and through to the tip of the gusset. So we have finished the tail. We'll clip all of our threads and clip our curves so that we can flip the little guy around. Clip your tip off. Here's a trick for stuffing when you don't have your hemostats. You stick your little pinky in like this, you pinch it, and then you pull. See that? That works really good if your pinky fits. All right, we have a tail, a cutie. Stuff your pencil in there. Spread it all apart. All right, there's your tail. Now we need to do the legs. We've got our head, we've got our tail, we've got our little arms. It's time to move on to the foot. We need to make sure we've marked everything. So with the foot, we have the Q and the R that needs to be marked. We also need to mark it on our foot. Here's the thing with this foot. When I made this pattern, I was like, sewing circles is so hard, which it's not fun. It takes a lot of pins. It's a little awkward to sew. So I thought I would make something easy for others to follow. So I came up with this method. I don't really know if, I think it's easier, but one of the things about it is it's easier for someone sewing my pattern. It definitely was not easier for me to design this, but I think that it's worth it in the end. It really makes sewing a foot quite easy. So let's go over how to make this foot. The key in being successful with it is making sure that you have your marks lined up and you pin them, because really it's just sewing kind of a circle, not really, one piece at a time. So we'll line it up. Okay, so here we are. We're going to start lining it up. We got to ease these in. Okay, the easiest thing is just to snip so you're not fighting the tension and you have the room to bend that fabric. Look, so when I bend it, to stretch it out so that the seam allowance works with the sewing line, you get these, you separate those spots out. And when you separate it, it makes it easier to pin accurately. Okay, so we're doing it on both sides. We're gonna pin, we'll do both feet at the same time. So we're gonna sew from this dot to this dot on both feet. Then we'll pin this side to both of these. Okay, here's our feet. Now what we're gonna do is put this one and this one together. So up and over, up and over. Okay, so we have both feet sewn to this point. What we're going to do is then we sandwich the foot together, and then we just sew from here down to where we marked this little T right here on the pattern. And then on this side, we're going to sew all the way down, but leave your gap. All right, make sure we're clipping these curves. Now here's where the magic happens with this little foot. Okay, so we have it sewn on each side. Now we just have these little holes. And when we pull our foot this way, we just are gonna, you have to ease it in a little bit. We just have to sew from one stitch line to the other stitch line, and then our foot is closed. So is this easier than sewing circles? All the time it takes to pin, and I mean, I think so, but Did you see how fast we got it done? Which is super nice. But was it easier to design? Probably not. But I will tell you, I will go to all sorts of weird lengths in my design process to avoid doing a part of the process that I do not like. So that includes sewing circles, which, I mean, that's part of life. Sometimes you have to sew a circle and I'll survive. But another thing that I will try to avoid, and we'll do all sorts of designing and time on that end of it, instead of hand sewing. I hate hand sewing. I'll avoid that as much as possible. Even if it takes me hours and hours to figure out a way to design something that means that I do not have to hand sew it, I will do that. I just don't enjoy it. I also feel like, I mean, I don't mind hand sewing. You always have to do the ladder stitch and everything, but I think that the accuracy goes down when you start hand sewing each piece on. And to all those people out there that hand sew their whole plush, props to you, because I just do not have the patience for that, do not find that enjoyable. So I think that that is awesome that you guys can do that, and I just am amazed by you. Okay, so we've sewn the top of that. So for the next part, we're gonna go, you just pull all the way, and you pin that, and then we're gonna sew across there. This one you have to open up this seam. See how it fits so nicely? And then we just go from here to there. Easy peasy. So let's do that. Here we go. I've got two little legs. Clip around the feet. I'll tell you, these hemostats, they're the best tools for the business to turn things around. Put them in, grab something on the other end, and pull. If you really got to grab onto a tiny spot though, like these guys they'll even clamp and latch, so then you have to, it'll really lock down on things, which is handy. But just be careful if you are grabbing a tiny bit of fabric, it will tear your fabric. Okay, push your little feetsy seams out. Okay, so it definitely makes more of a square foot, but I think they're cute. And what did I say? They are easier than a round foot. Just a few extra steps of putting it together, but it goes to show that there are lots of different ways of doing something, and really, if you like the outcome, then it's a good way of doing it. Okay, I want to show you something. Here is a good example of something that I did that is not perfect. Happy little accidents, right? I'm gonna turn into Bob Ross over here. Okay. Can you see that? I did not end up opening the seam all of the way when I pinned it together. So now I have a little pin tuck there, which makes it so that when I stuff it, it's going to always have a little pinched fabric there. So that's a really good reason to make sure when you're sewing over top of a second seam that you make sure it's open all of the way. And it's just as tricky because when you're sewing plushies, soft toys, whatever you want to call them, you're sewing a lot of curved edges. And so making sure that those are open makes a big difference in the final product. Bugger. Okay, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so those things bother me, but it's okay. We'll survive. Okay, now it's time to put the rest of the body together. I have my feet. Let's turn my hands around. I never flipped them. Okay, so here's my arms. They're really simple. They're just little guys. We have our belly. Here's our body. Okay, I'm gonna mark for my leg placement. This is really important for these little guys. And here's an arm placement. I really like to mark this one because then we don't have like crooked arms. And we have our face and our tail. Okay, so as far as this body piece is concerned, I tried to make it really easy too. If you can tell, I've got this like square almost shape cut out of it. And that is because instead of having a base for the pattern, I chose to combine them, and then this just folds over like this, so it's sitting on itself. So I just combined the two pieces together, which makes it super easy. Is it the easiest as far as like design choices? Probably not, but it makes it easier for the end seamstress to make this pattern. So it's just all things to consider. So what we're gonna do first, put these right sides together. We're gonna get our little tail, and on the pattern I had it marked where you should place your tail. So make sure that this is open all of the way and right side out. And then we're gonna sandwich it between these two pieces. Pin it on, and then put this on top. And we're gonna start just above the tail and sew down to this edge. And then we're also gonna jump over here, and we're gonna also sew this bottom edge. Okay, so let's do that. From here to here, and then here to here. We've got it sewn from here to here, and then we sewed down here. We're gonna open it, check, make sure we didn't do anything we didn't wanna do. We've got a cute little tail. I could have probably sewn a little bit lower because that would have given us more room at the neck, but I think it's okay. Okay, so now that we've got our tail on, okay, so we've also got here we are, we still have this open square at the back, so we've got to close that. We're gonna grab both of these pieces right here away from the seam, and we're gonna line up our seams right here like this. Okay, so then we're gonna open it like that. Then we're just gonna sew right here. If you want a curved bum so it's not so square back there, we can go start a little bit lower and kind of make an arch. So it's time. We've got our tail on, we've got our bum stitched closed. It's time to attach our legs. On the pattern, it's marked with little notches of where you're going to attach your legs. Remember, we had this little marking right here for the BB marking on there, right there. Okay, so we have to pay attention to the direction of our foot now. So this is the front, this is the back, and we need to do the same for this one. So we're going to fold the top, put our seams together so that the legs actually end going forward. And then we have to make sure that when we're laying them down, this is the tail, that when we're laying them actually down, let's see if I can get a good image of this. It's gets harder to photograph something or show something when here's our two notches, one was right here and one's right here. We have to put these in at an angle with our little marking right here, and the other one as close as possible to the edge as we can get it. And you have to put the foot in this way because when you open it, if you don't put them at an angle to match the curve of the belly, then your legs are gonna sit out funny. So in order for the legs to sit straight and go straight down, we have to sew them at an angle. So there's two things that you have to look for. One, that you're sitting at the right angle, and the pattern shows you the BB marking. That's where it needs to be touching, is on that notch right there on the edge to the BB marking. So like this. And then pin them in. And honestly, I really recommend basting them in because they get fiddly and they can move around and then they'll still go funny. The other thing that you need to look out for is you make sure that when you're laying your foot down, that the back of the foot is touching the tail or the bum. Otherwise, your foot is going to be facing backwards. So those are the two things that you got to be watching for. So there's our BB marking. Can you see it right there? It's kind of dark. Right there. It's going to go right here. And then the other line, the other notch, is where the tip of your foot goes. Right there. Okay? So now that they're basted in, we can pin the belly on. So we're just going to line up the belly, this belly seam to the bum seam. Make sure they're open so you don't get another foot mistake. Darn it. And then make sure your tail and your feet are all tucked in. And we're going to bring this edge up here, touch this edge, line that up, the neck, pin that in place, and then we're going to ease the fabric in all the way around. Then we're going to do it to the other side. Start at the top, pin it in, and then we're going to ease it all the way around over the foot. Okay, so this is our belly attached to our body. We're getting close. We're getting really close. So now we're just going to go all the way around on the bed. So one thing about this is this giant body piece, I really like to put the belly down, and so around this way, then we're not worrying about this bulk underneath. So here we go. We've sewn all the way around here. Can you see that? All right. Now we're going to clip our curves. We can clip off these extra little legs. Okay, ready to turn it around. All right, we did it. See how the legs are nice and straight? Our tail is on, our body is on. We're getting really close. I'm feeling good about this. Is to pin on our little hands with the markings. We have these little markings that we added from our pattern. We're going to add it to that. Make sure your seams are open all the way. Use your finger warming technique, your finger irons. That's what I like to call them. It's finger ironing. Pin those little arms on. We've got our little arms pinned on. Here's our arms pinned on. Okay, now comes the hardest part. So the body stays right side out, but the head needs to go right side in, wrong side out. And then we need to pin on the body to the head. Use your finger irons. Open your seams. Rub them for a second. Press on them so that they stay open. We don't want any tucked seams because they're only half open. Okay, use your finger iron. Rub those open. And then you're going to put the body, the belly, facing the nose. Just put the whole thing in there. And one of your markings on your pattern was to indicate, so you should have a tiny little notch there to indicate where the center of your belly is. You're going to line that up to that front center seam on the head. Okay, pin that on. And then something that we can do to make this ease around a little bit easier is to actually clip your neck seam on your head. So we're just going to clip a little bit to ease the tension so we can actually line up the actual sew line. Okay, so the next thing we're going to pin is the edge and make sure they're lined up together. Okay, so here's this edge. Here's this edge. We're going to line them up together and we're going to pin. And we're going to use the fact that these are open now to make sure that everything lines up. See how everything lines up so nicely because of those little clips that we put in the seam? Pull them up, make sure they're all lined up together. Now, if you're sewing on minky or fur, You're going to want to put in a lot of pins. This is a tricky seam to be sewing, and the more pins you have in there, the more you can trust that you were accurate and you don't have to worry about shifting fabric while you're doing it. Because even with cotton, this seam, I still use a lot of pins. Accurate when we're practically sewing blind, because in all reality, you just really have to trust that you're doing a good job, that your pins are holding things where they're supposed to be, and that you're just sewing along. The other thing that you can really got to watch out for is that that there's no corner or something that is tucked in there that shouldn't be sewn, because we've all sewn something that shouldn't have been sewn at the same time. So pinning all that together helps too. One thing that we can really watch for with this, just as we go, we want to just keep curling it around. Okay, so here's that final seam. See how we just, oh, that got folded in on itself again. So we'll probably have to cut. So what I do when this happens is you just cut it like that, so it's not tugging. But other than that, look, it looks really good. Okay, I'm really happy with that. Here we go. Here he is, all together. We did it. He turned out really cute, didn't he? Okay, so one last seam that we want to sew. We left this neck opening quite large to give ourselves room to sew this neck, but we don't want to have to stuff it like that. So we're going to turn his whole body wrong side out again, get everything tucked in, and we're going to line up this neck seam, because that's not something that we want to sew by hand. It's just not easy, and especially as you're stuffing it, if you're not worrying about stuffing and cinching up your neck. So really, for this small of a plush, we probably only need like 2.5 inches, maybe 3 inches up here of room to stuff. So we're gonna start, this is the body, we're gonna work our way from the seam that we have right above the tail, up across the neck and up about 2 inches, maybe 1.5 inches, and sew that with the sewing machine. And that'll still leave us a gap for stuffing, but not such a large gap that we have to sew closed by hand. So let's do that. Okay, we're gonna clip curves. The other thing we haven't done yet is clip the neck curve. Let's do that. Okay, for real this time we get to turn it right side out. Okay. And there we go. Last thing, we have to stuff him, of course. Stuff the body, we're gonna stuff the arms, the tail, and the legs, and then we'll ladder stitch all that closed. And then the very, very last thing before we're done is we need to lightly stuff our nose. Even sometimes just turning the fabric right side out, if it's a thicker fabric, is enough because of the seam allowance. And then, oh, he's a bugger. Okay, I think we got it. We're gonna ladder stitch him on a nose. So let's stuff his body. We'll do that really fast. At least it'll be fast for you guys. And then we'll ladder stitch this nose on. Okay, and here we have him. He's all stuffed. Now he's got stuffing all over him. It's a messy job. It's a messy job. Now we need to ladder stitch. We're going to ladder stitch closed the back of the head, the back of the arms, the tail, and the feet. If you need to learn more about ladder stitch, watch my other video about ladder stitching, and I'll get that done really quick. Here we have him. He's cute. Everything's sewn up. Last thing we need to do is add his little nose. So I turned it right side out. You can stuff it a little bit if you want, but then all we have to do is use a little needle and tuck it in 1/4 of an inch for our seam allowance, so we have a little room so we're not showing a raw edge during our stitching. Get those seams in there. Okay, so then all you do is stick it on the tip of his nose. We're gonna pin him in place. I'm gonna ladder stitch around, and then he'll be completely done. We've done it. That's exciting. I did want to show you his ears, how they stick straight up because of that tension that we created from that curve. So keep that in mind if you choose to design your own plush. And look at his straight little legs. They turned out cute, right? And they're sitting, and if we put them down on the table, they sit so nicely. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to join my school community, it's called the Plushie class, so consider going over there and joining in that fun. It's just a lot of conversations, a lot of talking about plushies and celebrating each other's wins. So head on over there. The free fox pattern is in there, so come join us. We'd love to have you. We'll see you in the next video.